Hello, everyone. Just want to welcome you today to our webinar on funding options for small businesses. I hope everyone can see the screen clearly. This is put on by the International Rescue Committee, and we have a small business program here at the IRC in Salt Lake City. Feel free to contact us. We support businesses of all types. We primarily support refugees, immigrants, and individuals who are starting a business or own a business and need support, who have barriers to resources. We offer free services, and that can look many different ways: one-on-one counseling, access to loans, and we're always trying to support you with upcoming grants that we find out about and those grant applications. So if you should have a need as an entrepreneur, whether you're in the ideation phase, the startup phase, or an existing business trying to set goals for yourself and wanting that partner in growth for your business, we are here for you. Reach out if you have any questions. Now let's dig into the presentation. So, funding options. Funding for your business comes different ways. But one way it doesn't often look like is money falling from the sky. What we need is to count less on money falling from the sky and more planning. So creating a roadmap for how you're going to fund your business in those early days or through any growth that you have a goal to grow to a second location or start a new revenue stream. These goals might take a little bit of money. So how are you going to come up with that money? And there are lots of different ways, but there are pros and cons, good things and bad things about each type of funding. So let's consider there are two different types of funding. There are types of funding that are dilutive, we say, and types of funding that are non-dilutive. And we talk about dilution as in you are diluting the equity of the company. Currently, you might be a solopreneur, you started your own company, and you own 100% of that company. Now, if you were to take on certain kinds of funding, it might require that you give up some of that ownership. And when you give up ownership, you give up certain control over the decisions for the business. You might give up some control over the direction you want to take it, and you might give up the control over who gets the profits of the business, how much you reinvest in the growth of the business versus take home, things like that. So non-dilutive are forms of funding that do not take away your equity. So these forms of funding, you get to keep the control in your hands. We're going to go over each kind of funding, but in this context of some being dilutive and some being non-dilutive. So this, I have a picture of a pie. Now, these two pies are quite different. If you look at them up close, I know the print's kind of small. Let's talk about the pie on the left. This one, the orange part of the pie, is the part of the company that the owner currently owns. The owner currently owns 62%, 62.5% of this pie. And say they had somebody willing to go in and invest in the company in the early days. I have titled that person for this display Cousin Mo. Cousin Mo put forth some money and was given 25% of the equity of the company. He is part owner of this company. Then, say a little bit into the company, you had some struggles, you realized you needed a little bit more funding, and you brought on an investor. That investor owns now 12.5% of this pie. This is an example where the owner still has by far the majority of the pie. This owner is going to still be able to make most decisions and decide who gets the profits and win for this business. Now, the pie on the other side, for example, the right-hand pie, we have the owner with 37% of the pie. Maybe Cousin Mo only owns 14.8% of this company. They're in yellow, but the investor owns 48.1%. Now, who in this circumstance is going to have the most control over the direction the company takes, the decisions it makes, and where the profits go? This is something where maybe you start out and you and your cousin really owned the entire pie, the two of you together, and decision making was pretty simple. But you brought an investor on. Maybe in year two, you brought an investor on and they gave you $20,000 for some of the equity in your company. Now, maybe in year three, you decided to sell some more equity in your company. And eventually, it became this pie that we see on the right, where the investor has 48%. But at this point, our cousin and the owner have lost a lot of the pie being the equity, the ownership of that company. Now, neither of these pies is bad or good. That's what we're going to discuss today. It really just depends. Do you want control? Is the investor a good fit for you and the vision you have for the company? What are the agreements that you've come up with together to decide who has what equity in this company, who makes the decisions, etc.? So, investors. This is the first funding option we're going to talk about. This is dilutive funding. Now, it's important to address the fact that investors usually want some equity in the company. That's not to say always. You can always find an agreement that fits you, but almost every investor, they want to buy into this company for an opportunity to get some money out of it eventually, right? That is kind of the foundation of why they want to be an investor. And there are all sorts of investors. Here we have angel investors listed, family firms, VCs, which are venture capitalists. Any money or service given when equity is negotiated is an investor. That can look like a friend, a family member, a former business partner that you know you like working with. Anyone who wants equity in your company and is willing to give you an exchange of money or capital or even services towards your business is an investor. They're investing in your business, investing in its success in hopes of getting some return. So investors come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes they want to just put in money and get out money. They don't want a lot of control. They want to let you have control. Sometimes investors say that they don't want very much control in the beginning, but you find that year one and two and three, it's changing. Suddenly they want to be a big part of your decision making. So it's really important that if you do give someone equity in your company, you have really clear documents that outline the relationship. This is how much control you have. These are the things that I will do as the owner. These are the things that you can be a part of the decision making in or the responsibility for. As long as you have really very clear legal documents, investor relationships can look lots and lots of different ways. So, not bad, could be really good, but you have to decide what kind of control you want to hold on to when it comes to your company. Also, when you're a startup, you might be willing to give a lot of your company away for a very little price. This is going to change year by year. Maybe your company starts to thrive, and in year three, you would never give away as much equity as you considered in year one for the same amount of money. So give yourself some time to decide if taking on an investor is the right fit for you while you build your company and create something of worth. It might be wise to take investors on later rather than earlier. Of course, it always depends. These investors could potentially be people with wonderful skills or other assets that they can contribute to the business, relationships with other potential investors or funders, or organizations that support you. So it always just depends on the person, the investor, but you want to have very, very clear boundaries set about what they can and can't have control over and what your roles are together. So, when considering a business partnership with an investor, like I said, it really depends on what they bring to the table. Do they have skills? Do they have time? Do they have money? Do they have relationships? How do they support your business? This is to be considered, not just a check. A check can come with way too many strings attached that force you to be the puppet on the other end of those strings if you're not careful. So always consider who they are, what their expectations are, and be really clear in your communication with them and get it in writing. All right. Investors tend to be the one dilutive type of funding, although there have been some situations where uh, very, very, very rarely where a grant or a loan might want a percentage of your company. It's very rare. Most other forms of funding are non-dilutive, which gives them a big advantage because you keep equity in your company. You get the chance to grow it, develop it, show that it's worth something before you take on investors. Now, not everybody has the luxury of following that path. If you need an investor up front to get started, it just is what it is. You just need to be really careful about that relationship and know that you're worth something. Your idea is worth something, and you're worth the potential to grow and create something. So a lot of the ways that people do that are funding their small business through non-dilutive. And non-dilutive funding comes in these forms. Debt. Debt is the most common non-dilutive funding. That means taking out a loan or a line of credit, something that you have to pay back over time in order to start your business. This is most common because not everybody has an investor in their family circle, friends, families, relatives, somebody that's willing to invest in a startup, which is a gamble at the beginning, which is something that is a little bit unproven. So a lot of people, as a matter of fact, most people start a business with debt. Debt can be good and it can be bad. Like any loan, there are terms. So you're going to want to watch for debt that is friendly towards you and not get in over your head. Now, I will have some links here, just some local options for micro lending. This is just one form of debt that small businesses use. These are CDFIs that I'm recommending, and they are looking at community development and the benefit to the community when considering somebody for a small business loan. Then the pro of this type of lending is that they will lend sometimes to riskier individuals who maybe don't have fully developed credit. They don't necessarily have a spouse, financial backup in the household, or it's a startup. So these CDFIs are looking at other factors like the benefits to the community. Also, they have a little bit higher interest because they are lending to a riskier demographic when it comes to repayment. So microlending is a great idea if you're not a candidate for more traditional small business loans through larger organizations like your banks. Now, if you are a candidate for that type of funding and you can get some of the better small business loans like the SBA loans, the 7A, for example, they often have better terms. They might have a longer repayment timeline. They might have a better interest rate. They might offer you a higher amount that you can take out. So these are considerations. Not all loans are created equal. So it's really, really important that you compare. You compare the loans, you compare the interest rates, and you figure out if it's going to be something that you can repay over time. All this talking, I needed a drink of water. Next, we have grants. So grants are kind of a golden standard. Why? You could probably answer this for me, but it's because you don't have to repay them. Not usually, not 99% of the time. Grants are free money, quote, free money. And this is a beautiful thing, but are grants readily available? They're actually hard to find, and even harder to find are grants that are a good fit for your type of business. So if you are expecting grants to help you start a business is going to be particularly hard. Most grants you're going to find are going to expect you to have been in business for a certain period of time before you're eligible. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of grants out there for startups, which are already started, showing that they have some traction, that they're starting to do pretty well, but that they're not 3 or 4 years old. That window of time, like a startup window of time, there are actually quite a few grants out there for that window of time. What there are fewer grants for are the very early days of actually starting. That is something that is considered a very risky thing to do until you've proven that there's interest, proven that you have customers. It's really hard to find startup grants for the very, very beginning days of starting up your business. But I, as a business owner myself, found that I got much more lucky with receiving grants over time. As a matter of fact, the 6th year I was in business was my best year for grants. It was the first time that I got a national grant, which is harder to get because so many people are applying. So when you are applying for grants, you always have to consider that there's a certain amount of people applying that I will call the pool. A pool is the individuals all applying for the same grant. And that pool might be really small for a local grant. If you can find a grant that is through your local economic development organization or a business chamber or another nonprofit that's trying to support small businesses, that pool of candidates is going to be much smaller than you applying for a grant that is a national grant, something that, pardon me, anyone in the US can apply for. That is going to be very competitive and very hard to set yourself apart in that candidate pool. And like I listed here, you've got to figure out if it's the right grant for you. You're always looking to find out, what is the impact that this grant wants to have? How does it want to help? And then, are you a good fit for that impact? Some grants are specific, like you might find a grant that is for Black owned salons in the Western states. And that would be so specific that, by applying for this grant as a Black owner of a salon in one of these states, I'm going to be in a very small candidate pool. Some grants might be much more vague. They might be saying, we're interested in helping job creation and small business growth um, in businesses owned by women. Now, that's a little specific, but there are a lot of women business owners in the US, and you will be in a candidate pool that's very hard to set yourself apart. So you have to look at, what is the impact the grant hopes to provide? Do I fit with that impact? And decide if it's going to be worth your time to really apply for a grant. That's the thing that people hardly ever tell you when they're talking about grants, is that it takes a lot of time and energy. Free money is not that free when it comes to the fact that grant applications take a lot of time. It takes time to find grant opportunities, and then filling out applications can take a lot of time. There's often grant reporting on the backside too. So most grants that you receive are going to want some sort of reporting from you showing whether or not you were able to make the impact you hope to make. So consider that time is always an element in grants, and look for grants that are a really good fit for you. I have a few websites here that are grant websites, and you can start navigating through them. Um, like I said, there are a lot of grants out there, but there are very few that are a good fit and a good use of your time. And I would say that, as a business owner myself, who's really received a number of grants over the years, I probably receive one grant for every 8 that I've applied for. So there's a lot of hidden time in grant applications in order to make this quote free money happen. All right. The third one here on the non-dilutive side is crowdsourcing or crowdfunding. These are things like Kickstarters and GoFundMe's. There are even crowdfunding platforms that sell or give away equity in your company. Most of them are based on rewards, where you offer rewards to people who donate to your fund, but some don't. Some actually are just really much more charitably based, like GoFundMe doesn't expect rewards. GoFundMe is like, hey, be kind. This business is a great idea and they bring so much to our community. Be kind to them. But you have to be really careful which platform you use, which approach you take, because it has to be a good fit for you. So I would only typically recommend GoFundMe for individuals or businesses that have a really good story about why they're struggling and how they need help. Um, Kickstarter, on the other hand, is more about like, hey, this isn't necessarily a sad story. This is a exciting story. We have this opportunity. We have this opportunity to open a second location or launch this new product. And we want to bring you on board with what's happening. And that brings me to my favorite element about crowd. It's not just you saying to one or two people, invest in my company, invest in what I'm doing. It's saying, I believe in the power of community. I believe that I don't need $1,000 from five people. I need $2 from, hundreds and hundreds of people. And it will get me to the same place. And isn't that a beautiful thing that you can ask and you can put it out there to the community, to the world, and receive just a few dollars from people who would otherwise sometimes not be able to be investors at all. And yet they're able to invest in your company in this small way, and it adds up. So I think crowdsourcing is pretty exciting. It's also a one way to build an audience or build a following, because if you're involved in one of these crowdsource campaigns, you're putting out there, hey, this is who I am. This is what we're doing. This is what we need from you. And people share your story, and it begins to have this ripple effect and communicate your story to people that otherwise you might not be able to touch with or have contact with. Um, and it's a beautiful thing. It's also really exhausting. Kinda like running a political campaign. It's a little bit like running for office. Like, you have to get out there every chance you get to say, here's what I'm doing. This is why it's important. I know that when I ran my first Kickstarter, I hadn't realized how exhausting it would be, how I would have to fill my calendar with all these events to make sure I'm post on social media every day, to have a team around me that was also posting to their social media and spreading the word, to try to find opportunities to go to this meeting or that salon and be able to talk to their staff, whatever it was. And my best fundraising opportunity ended up being a permaculture club meeting where I spoke in a garden about what I was doing. I was opening a little grocery store. And that meeting was the most financially beneficial step I made. I can't tell you how many times I had people tell me, ooh, I have a friend, they're really rich, they're about to donate a lot to your campaign. That never panned out. What panned out was getting my face in front of community and telling my story. So it is a little bit like running a campaign for office. You're going for mayor, but you're not. You're asking people to support you. And if you have a really good story about why what you're doing is important or unique, it can be a really powerful tool for you to get money. Now, almost all, not all, but almost all of these will take a percentage. Each of these platforms will take a percentage, either for processing or just to run their platform. It's different. Like Kiva, the top one here, is peer lending, and a really exciting platform where people can donate to your cause, and you can choose to let that money stay with Kiva and donate to businesses over and over and over again and continue to make impact based on each business that you donate to, paying back that money over time. So that's a peer lending platform. People give you money, but it's a lending platform. You could eventually withdraw the money that you lent, or let it continue to make impact and be lent to many people all over the world. It's pretty exciting. Kickstarter is reward based and they will take a percentage, but it is so successful that so many people have just found it is the best and strongest crowdsource platform to use. It is a use it or don't get it. No, meet your goal or don't get it platform, which scares people because if they set a goal of $10,000 and they don't meet that goal, they do not get that money. But what I've found and is well demonstrated is that everyone really gets behind you with that goal because they know that's how the platform works and they are invested in you reaching your goal, which ends up creating much more money brought to your cause through a platform. Kickstarter is really good at that. GoFundMe is more charitable. They'll take very little in fees from you, but you will have to have a very strong story as to why people should be supporting you. And Honeycomb Credit is peer lending, where they're lending you money but you will be repaying it to the people who lent you money. It's exciting because your community can become your lending institution and lend you money, and you can give your community that percentage of interest back with the loan rather than a bank. You are literally getting people to believe in you, often your customers, to lend you money and you pay it back. So these are just four. There are a number of platforms out there. It's worth researching. It is not easy, but it is a really powerful tool for growing a community around your business. And then last is personal savings. So this is one that is, again, often used to start companies. Often people will save up their money to start their company. But like we talked about in the beginning, it's really important that you create a roadmap for funding. So often funding a company is going to use three or so of these funding options, not just one. And personal savings cannot be everything, at least not for most of us. Often, personal savings is a great way to launch a company, but you should have a roadmap or a plan that allows you to grow and reach the demand of growing a business financially so that you can give it time to acquire those customers, to try those things and see what works and what doesn't work. That's what a startup is. A startup is you buying time to figure things out. So if your personal savings is only going to take you so far, you really need to be planning that crowdsourcing campaign or applying for your loans. Grants are great, but you can't count on them. So I think you should always consistently be looking for grants and taking the time to apply for grants you think would be a good fit because it make a tremendous deal of impact for your business and creating a successful business if you're able to get a grant or mini grants. Also, your personal savings, for example, might start you and then you take on a loan to help get you through year one. And during year one, you're showing that you're growing your customer base, that people are coming back repeatedly, that there's a demand for what you're doing. Maybe you've even learned that some idea you had in the beginning wasn't a great idea and that it wasn't actually what customers wanted, but you adjusted and you now have a new approach and you're finding it more successful. All of that is a very important story when approaching investors. And say that you got through year one or year two, you learned some lessons, you showed growth, and you took on debt. But in year three, you have an investor, maybe somebody that initially was a customer. You've been communicating with them off and on over time. They've seen your journey. They're much more likely to feel confident coming in as an investor at that point. And you're more confident as a business owner because you've proven your worth. So you might lose a small amount of equity for a larger amount of money than you would have if you had asked for that investor to step up in year one or year two. So these are all ways in which you can fund your business. But what you want to consider is everything that you do to fund your business can either give you more freedom as a business owner or it can paint you into a corner. When we talk about being painted into a corner, let's just quickly talk about some of the ways you can get painted into a corner. One corner might be that you have given up too much equity to investors, and suddenly they want to control the decision making for your company. Maybe you had wonderful ideas about the kind of company you wanted to create, had a lot of integrity, and you could see that developing with your customers as you started your company and grew it. But now investors come in and they want to chip away at some of your qualities that gave you that integrity. They might say, we're going to use different ingredients in our bakery products, or no, we're going to cut corners on the services that we're offering. And if this is something that you don't feel good about, but you've lost control of your company by giving away too much equity, you might have to lose some of heart and soul that you put into that company. That is one way you can paint yourself into a corner. Another might be a financial way, like taking on a loan that had very high interest. And in your mind, and you saw your company growing financially in ways that would allow for repayment of that loan in no way that caused a lot of stress for you. You have done your projections. You're like, we can pay this off by year 4. But then something happens. Sales are down. Maybe something's happening in the community. Maybe something's happened with you having access to some of your ingredients or your products. And suddenly sales are down and your projections were incorrect. And that high interest debt is painting you into a corner because you can no longer repay it in the way you felt like you would be able to repay it. That is another way you can get painted into a corner. So be careful that you are taking a form of funding and fundraising for your business that allows you to move forward and grow your business, because painting yourself into a corner, whether it's financially or with decision making, can be the end of a business. Things can really start to unravel. So, what does your financial roadmap look like for your business? You can consider so many forms of funding. As we discussed, there are many dilutive and non-dilutive forms of funding your business, but you really have to consider which one is right for you and at what time. Crowdsource funding is another great example of this. It is such a powerful community builder. It is free money, even though you might lose a percentage to processing fees. When the money comes to you, it is yours and you don't have to pay it back. What a beautiful thing. But one thing we see is that not everyone's customers wants to be charitable over and over and over again, right? You can only ask people for money so often. So I had a business I worked with that had a troublesome time for their business, and somebody generously started a GoFundMe for their business. Now, that sounds really nice, right? Somebody really trying to do something kind for them. But the fact is, this business had planned to do a Kickstarter when they opened their next location. And by somebody starting a GoFundMe that generously earned, I believe, around $5,000 for this business, it made it more difficult for them to launch a Kickstarter for that second location where they would have been asking for closer to 25,000. And because you can't just turn around to your customers and ask for money every few months, you have to time when you are going to do it. You have to plan it. It has to be a conscious decision, a well thought out decision, so that you have a strong story for why you should have that money. This is an example of thinking about your roadmap. When do you need money to grow or start or adjust your business model? And what type of funding is best for that time in your journey? I hope this is good food for thought for you. I hope it gives you some options. And again, please reach out to me in Salt Lake City if you have any small business counseling needs. Thank you and have a lovely evening.